Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Create the Ripple podcast. I'm your host, Candice Smiley. Here we trust the ningle and we tell the truth. This is a podcast. We are looking to have conversations that matter, conversations that take courage to engage in, where we cut through the noise that exists online to bring you incredible content, amazing speakers and stories to inspire you to live your best, listen to yourself, and tell the truth of who you are and who you just might become. Hey, welcome back. We're here for another episode of the Create the Ripple podcast. I am your host, Candice Smiley, and I'm stoked to be here today. My guest today is a complete professional. He is an award-winning professional speaker, author, and coach, Marcus Bales. He has an upcoming book called Don't Shut Up, a collection of stories and advice on how to overcome social anxiety. It's out as of May 3rd, 2022. It's a compilation of Marcus's own experiences growing up with and eventually overcoming debilitating social anxiety, as well as tried and true tips and techniques for anyone struggling with this incredibly common disorder. He and I chat really about speaking with others. Now, if you're someone who's listening in and you are terrified of public speaking, or maybe you do struggle with social anxiety in some way, this is definitely going to be a podcast for you. It's not just for public speakers. It is for you, the mom. It is for you. Maybe you have a job. It's really for anyone who needs to interact with people. Oh, wait, that's all of us. It's Marcus's journey from a socially anxious child to now an award-winning professional speaker. And it's awesome. In the book, and he shares on the podcast as well, there are some techniques and tools. So you're going to walk away from this podcast knowing how he conquered his anxiety so thoroughly that he even won a rap battle judged by Flava Flav and Kevin from The Office. And he wants to help you as my listener to achieve a similar result and perhaps previously unthinkable accomplishments. Anyway, without any further ado, let's get to the show. All right. Well, with me today, I have Marcus. Marcus has written an incredible book, which, Marcus, I got to tell you, when I saw the title, Don't Shut Up, I got really inspired because certainly things like social anxiety and anxiety were really big triggers and challenges for me. I'm highly introverted, and so I prefer the company of my dogs to most people. That being said, we live in very much an extrovert world and we need to be able to interact with people. And of course, part of my mission in life is to have an impact, and you can't have impact unless you can interact with people. So I'm stoked to leave my listeners today with some tips and tools and ideas and a little bit about who you are and why you wrote the book. So before we get any further, let's let the listener know who you are, where you come from, and how you got here.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm Marcus. I'm a professional speaker, author, and coach specializing in social anxiety. I actually grew up in the Midwest with severe social anxiety as a kid. And that was really what spurred me to go on my journey to overcome my own social anxiety. And over the past over 20 years now, I've not only learned to deal with my own anxiety on a micro level, person to person, but also have risen to the ranks of a professional speaker. And now I get to help other people overcome their fears of interacting with other people and watch the joy and the happiness that can follow when you start to open up to other people and interact with other people.
Tell me then, what made you decide to write the book about it? Because obviously you've done some key things so that you could move from shy kid. Can I say that? I mean, it's more than that.
More than shy even.
Right. Move from that place to writing a book. And I sense that there was a bit of a journey. Where was sort of the tipping point for you when you realized, okay, this is a challenge. I'd like to overcome it. And where was sort of the first resources that you started to reach from? I'd love to know that story.
Yeah. So it's actually a very clear moment in my past. One of those rare moments from your childhood that remains very clear to this day. It was actually sixth grade. And I was so socially anxious that I could not read out loud. I was incapable of doing so. And at the time, that got me labeled as a special needs student. And I was put into a special reading class, separated from my peers, and forced to read the same small book over and over again. And I felt humiliated because I knew that I could read. I just couldn't read out loud to pretty much anybody. And it wasn't until the end of sixth grade that my mother noticed that I was reading a book to my brother before going to bed. And she went, "Hey, that's weird. If he can't read, how's he reading that book right now?" So she went to my teachers, told them this story and said, "You have to give him a silent reading test." And they did. And I scored right within the normal range. And I was taken out of that special reading class. And that moment really resonated with me, even at such a young age, and made me realize that I needed to learn how to communicate with others or I would be left behind. It didn't matter how grand of an idea I had or how smart I was. If I couldn't communicate that effectively, then I'd be left behind. So that really was the start of my journey. And it's been a long, kind of winding journey ever since. Obviously, as a child, you don't know that other people experience social anxiety in the same way that you do. You don't understand that there are resources out there and there are books and professional speakers who specialize in these areas. So it was really kind of my own bumbling around, finding resources and learning as much as I could over my adolescence. And then eventually, as an adult, really dove into the science behind it and researched why we feel these feelings of anxiety and how we can better overcome them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that because I think for so many people, they'll run into this and then they almost like claim the label, and that becomes a self-limiting almost, prophecy, right? Because they say, well, I am this way. I struggle with this. And they really claim it. And I'm often intrigued with those people who say, this is a challenge and you didn't claim it. You claimed, the opposite of it, right? It was just something to overcome. So kudos to you for that. So largely what I'm hearing you say is you worked through it while you were a kid and then through your teenage years. When did you sort of realize that you wanted to do more public speaking? Because people, fear public speaking, right? Like it's one of those like top things. They're just like, I'd rather die than public speak. So talk to me about that. Where was the moment when you went, I want to do this? Was it sort of a challenge piece or was there more to it than that?
Yeah, it was a combination. So as I got better at speaking interpersonally, I constantly challenged myself more and more because I wanted to get better. It became kind of almost like a game where I was like, okay, I've mastered this and I've gotten better. How far can I keep going? And then after high school, I started to pursue a career in music production as an electronic music producer, which part of that role is being a live DJ. You can only perform your music live if you DJ it, which there's some interaction with the crowd, which was absolutely terrifying to me. So I knew that I would have to interact with large crowds if I wanted to succeed at that. So I started to take small shows and gigs and started to push myself that way. But it wasn't until I met one of my mentors and friends who actually ran a event company and they were looking for some DJs. And in a passing conversation, I said, oh, well, I'll try out. So I went in, tried out, and became one of their DJs. And that began the journey of me becoming a professional speaker. I started out as a DJ, then eventually moved into MC work. And soon enough, I was one of the most booked MCs in my area. And I was interacting with crowds of 500 or 2,000 people on any given Friday or Saturday night. And once I overcame that initial fear of speaking to crowds that large, I was like, wow, this is a really great way to get a message across to a large group of people. And then I started to really want to go deeper and branch out into longer speeches, not just quick introductions. I wanted to do full hour-long presentations. So that kind of led me into the career of professional speaking. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Do you find now that it's almost a joy to do what you're doing? Like, have you been able to move through the anxiety into a place where this has become, I don't want to say normal, but is it something that you get a lot of joy from now? Or do you find that you still struggle with some of the anxiety every time you do it?
So it's both. You never truly overcome your anxiety. You just learn to manage it in the best way you can. We all have those feelings of inadequacy and wanting to be accepted by others, and they never go away no matter how good you are. So though I thrive and love to be on stage, it's one of the things that gives me so much joy in my life. Even at the conference I'm at right now, I'm about to go speak in a couple hours, and I'm a little bit nervous because they never go away. But it's all about how you channel that energy. Your body gives you that boost of endorphins, and you can decide how you want to react. They can either be positive or negative. And now I get to rechannel them into positive energy. So when I get on stage, that excitement is now fun instead of anxious.
So I love that you say that, because I found that performing for me was a great way to get over it, because I would imagine that I was a different person than my own self. However, when I really finally started doing a lot of the personal work to figure out, because for me, the anxiety came up because I wasn't being truthful. I wasn't talking about some of the things that had happened to me. And so there was a lot of hiding. And I found that once I stopped hiding and I was no longer afraid of someone, whether it was one audience or many audiences, of knowing or seeing myself, it was almost like there was a self-trust. Once that changed, then, the nerves were different. I was no longer afraid to speak. I was excited, like you say, right? But there was no longer that same fear of being seen, which is, I think, a big deal. And I know one of the things that I read in your bio is that you conquered the self-doubt. And I think self-doubt kicks in for a lot of people, whether it's starting their own business, asking a person out that they'd really like to spend more time with, or becoming a speaker or a booked MC. Kudos to you. I got my start in event planning, so I know what a feat that is. But talk me through that, where you shifted from, this beautiful, or rather to this beautiful place of, I don't have this self-doubt anymore. I know who I am and what I'm about, my message, and give the listeners a bit of hope that maybe if they're struggling to get to that place, that they can get to that place.
Yeah, just like anything else, it takes time. And one of the aspects that I preach more than anything else is practice. It's so well established in every other aspect of our lives. You want to get better at playing basketball? You practice. You want to be a better writer? You practice. But we never talk about it when we say, oh, you want to be a better speaker? Here's a book. Listen to better speeches. We never say, oh, go out and practice. But that's really where you become better. And you also learn to enjoy it, because every time you do a successful speech, you get that little bit of endorphins at the end that give you that positive reinforcement. So now, instead of only remembering the bad interactions that you had, you have so many good ones that are positive in your memory that now you want to have more. So the more speeches I gave and the more times I really connected with the crowd, the more positive feelings I had associated with being on stage. So now when I think about it, I think about those positive interactions instead of the negative ones. So being able to go out and practice, even speaking to one person, that makes it a lot easier to go out and have those more difficult conversations with the person you find attractive or your boss in a difficult situation. Once you have that practice under your belt, they're a lot easier, and you have those positive associations instead of negative.
I love that you said that there was this element of practice, because I feel like that's the truth. And before you can be good, you got to be bad. Like you really do. But once you do that, you're like, okay, let's not do that again. But I think so many people fear that because we're so worried about, what people think. And do you find that played a big part into your social anxiety? Were you worried so much about the other person, or was it much more internal for you?
Yeah. So I think the root of most anxiety comes from our fear of being accepted. We are social creatures. We want to be accepted into the herd. So being on stage or talking to other people, you're challenging that ability to be accepted. If you just sit down and shut up, you don't have to worry about, being accepted, because you never put yourself out there in the first place. But putting yourself out there, you do have that fear of rejection. So being able to understand that those feelings are largely unfounded. I am a perfect example of having crippling fear of being rejected by my peers, by audiences. And you find very quickly that once you start to go out and have more of these conversations, most people, most of the time, want to talk to you. They want to support you. And especially in public speaking, the audience is there for you. You are up there for a reason, and nobody wants to watch you fail. They all want to see you succeed. So when you start to take that pressure off yourself and you think of the audience as a group of friends there to support you instead of a group of faceless individuals there to judge you, it's a lot easier to control those feelings.
Was there a moment in your childhood? Like, do you remember is there a moment where you remember not being anxious and then something happened, or was just something that you were born with?
I think it's a combination of things. There are definitely distinct memories. I was not a popular child. I was bullied. I was kind of an outcast. I have some very early memories from like preschool and first grade where everyone is a bit awkward and there isn't really cliques yet. But, you slowly start to build that hierarchy fairly quickly in the education system. So there's a lot of memories that reinforce, that negative view of myself and then the negative feelings towards social interactions. But everyone has experienced those and you can't let them hold you back. Because once you start to push yourself, especially after school, then it's a much easier to build those relationships.
I agree. I love that you said that because I feel like that was my life when I was growing up. I was only in school till grade 4 and my parents pulled me out and they chose to home educate us, which was perfect for me because I preferred spending time by myself. However, the ability for me to interact with multiple different groups and never really being a part of anything has been great as an adult. Not so awesome as a kid who just wanted to be accepted. But before we wrap up, I want to talk more about your book. So let's say someone's listening, they're relating to what you say here. Like I was sharing with you before the show, a lot of people are listening while they're being active and they're going to want something that they can pick up, read, and feel like, wow, that's something I can action right away. What are people going to find when they pick up your book?
Yeah, they're going to find kind of a complete intro guide on how to be a more confident speaker, how to be a better speaker, and how to overcome that anxiety of speaking to someone in the first place. I break the book down into 3 sections: personal interactions, business interactions, and public interactions. So it allows you to kind of go at your own pace because each interaction type has a different stress response for some people. So if you need to focus more on personal interactions, you can maybe go through those chapters slower or reread them. Or maybe you need more assistance in public interactions. You can spend more time there. But the book does build on itself. So I do recommend reading the whole thing because there are aspects in every style of communication that you need to master. You need to learn to talk to one person before you can talk to thousands. But it really allows you to kind of pick up from the very ground level where you're very, very afraid to speak to anybody and work all the way up to being able to give that presentation that you've always dreamed.
Well, I'm so glad you say that because as you're speaking, I'm thinking of a very dear friend of mine who isn't sure yet how to share her story, but her story, like just who she is. And I wish more people would understand this, that we are inspired by your story, the story of you. How did you overcome? Because we have a tendency to compare, right, our stories to other people. And we look at these speakers and I'm like, they've just figured out how to tell their life story as a story. And when we hear that, we are inspired. We find, a relatability to it. And we think, well, if you did that, then I can do this. But we have a tendency to, sort of put it on a scale, right? And self-judge ourselves. But as you were speaking, I was like, well, I'm hoping the book isn't just for a speaker. I'm hoping the book isn't just because for like this friend I'm thinking about, she has such an impact, but her impact right now is more of a smaller circle. And she wants to graduate, but wants to start from that one place. So I'm loving that your book sort of grows on itself because I think that's for a lot of people, social anxious or not, there's certainly a progression. And we forget that, don't we, right? We want to be brilliant on stage yesterday, forgetting that there might be, some things. But as we wrap up, Marcus, is there anything that you'd love to leave the listener, something either on your mind or on your heart, or a message that you've been thinking about lately?
I always like to leave people with the same advice, and that is the more you open up to other people in this world, when you share your thoughts, your ideas, your feelings, you will become so much happier in the process. Even if you don't want to become a professional speaker, becoming a better speaker can have some profound effects on your life, your relationships, and your overall happiness. I know it did for me, and I really hope it does for everybody else. So, like the title of the book, don't shut up.
I love it. That's my favorite. Okay, I gotta ask. I've recently started adding this to the end of my podcast because I think it's really fun. So tell me about your favorite book, other than your own, of course.
I have so many. I would say from a business perspective, I really like Start With Why by Simon Sinek. That's a fantastic book. From a personal perspective, I love Stephen King. I really like The Outsider. It's one of his more recent books from a fiction standpoint. I really enjoyed that. As a child, my favorite book was Where the Wild Things Are. So that still holds a special place in my heart. So those are my three.
I love it. I love it. Like I say, it's new and people are like, oh, that's tough, but it's so good. Okay. And what are you reading right now?
Oh, I'm just finishing up Dave Grohl's autobiography. So Dave Grohl, the lead singer and guitarist for the Foo Fighters, recently came out with his autobiography, and it's very good.
Awesome. Once again, right? We are drawn to hearing other people's stories, other people's lives. I think we're fascinated. I think that's why we all love reality TV so much. We're like, what's it like where you live? But anyway, without any further ado, I want to say a big, huge thank you for taking time to come on and chat with me today. Of course, for my listeners, we're going to have all of the contact information rather for Marcus down below in the show notes. And there'll be links so you can go check out his book. And with that, thank you so much, Marcus, for being a guest today. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone else. I appreciate you taking time out to come and listen. And with that, we'll catch you on the flip side.